Have you ever felt like there's, a hidden layer beneath the surface of well-known ideas? A secret history, maybe, waiting to be uncovered?
Definitely. It happens more often than you'd think.
Well, today we're diving deep into the mind of one of history's most influential thinkers, Plato, but through a very specific and, well, intriguing lens.
Ah, yes. Through Helena Petrovna Blavatsky and her Theosophical movement, right?
Exactly. So we're exploring Blavatsky's unique interpretation of Plato based on her writings, her theosophical principles.
And what's fascinating here is that we're not just, you know, revisiting Plato in the usual academic sense. We're looking at how this whole esoteric tradition understood and actually used his work.
Right. And this isn't your typical philosophy lecture for sure. It's a fascinating look at how one esoteric viewpoint engages with a cornerstone of Western thought. Whether you're deep into philosophy or just curious, it offers a really unique perspective.
And it's worth reminding ourselves, and you listening, about the specific sources we're drawing on here. We're not pulling from everything ever written about Blavatsky and Plato.
Good point. Yeah, we're working from excerpts from a briefing document that analyzes Blavatsky's view. And that document itself uses her big works, Isis Unveiled, The Secret Doctrine, The Key to Theosophy, her collected writings.
And some other compatible theosophical sources, too.
Right. But the key thing is we are focusing exclusively on Blavatsky's perspective as it's presented in these materials. We're sticking to that framework.
So for you, the listener, this offers a bit of a shortcut, maybe, to understanding a pretty complex intersection of ideas.
Yeah, exactly. You might find some surprising connections popping up between Western philosophy and, say, Eastern thought.
Absolutely. We're hoping to give you a fresh look at Plato, one that goes beyond the standard interpretations.
We might even have some aha moments, uncovering these hidden layers of meaning that Blavatsky really believed were deliberately veiled.
It's quite a claim, isn't it, that a 19th century esotericist might hold the key to unlocking ancient Greek philosophy.
It really is. That's one of the big questions we'll be digging into.
And our mission, if you like, based on these sources, seems pretty clear.
It is. We're here to unpack Blavatsky's core argument about Plato, essentially, that he wasn't just a philosopher, but an initiated adept.
Right, an initiate of an anciently universal wisdom religion.
And that his philosophy, therefore, contains these veiled esoteric truths that, surprise, surprise, align pretty well with Theosophy.
Okay, so to guide us on this journey, what's the roadmap?
So first up, we'll tackle this idea of Plato as an initiate, what Blavatsky meant by that.
Okay.
Then we'll dive into how she saw his key concepts like the forms, the soul, that sort of thing, lining up with theosophical ideas.
Makes sense.
We'll also touch on something interesting, how Blavatsky explained apparent differences in her own works regarding the human constitution, the threefold versus sevenfold models.
Yes, that comes up.
Then her critiques of other Plato interpretations who she thought got it wrong.
And conversely, who she thought got it right, the interpreter she admired.
Exactly. And finally, the really crucial role she gave to Neoplatonism, seeing it as basically a precursor to Theosophy itself.
A lot to cover.
Definitely. Okay, let's unpack this. Blavatsky's central claim, right out of the gate. Plato wasn't just a philosopher in the way we might, think of one today.
Precisely. A cornerstone of Blavatsky's interpretation, really the cornerstone, is her assertion that Plato was an initiate of the ancient mysteries.
And for her, that wasn't just a side note.
Oh, no, not at all. It's absolutely fundamental. You can't understand his teachings properly, in her view, without grasping that he was an initiate.
So she believed he actually inherited his philosophy. It wasn't something he just sort of invented.
That's the idea. She traced Plato's wisdom back through Pythagoras.
Pythagoras.
Stating that Pythagoras himself got his knowledge from the remote East. This lineage is absolutely crucial in Blavatsky's framework. It connects Plato directly to what she saw as the ultimate source of all spiritual wisdom.
And did she find anything in Plato's own writings to back this up, or was it purely her interpretation?
Well, she pointed to his epistles. There are passages cited where he seems to acknowledge borrowing from ancient and sacred doctrines. For Blavatsky, that was confirmation. Evidence of this continuous stream of wisdom flowing down from ancient sources, which Plato tapped into.
So if we accept Blavatsky's premise, just for a moment, that Plato was an initiate, what does that imply for how he wrote, how he communicated his ideas?
Big implications. As an initiate, the idea is Plato was bound by oaths of secrecy. He couldn't just spell out the deepest truths, the really profound esoteric knowledge.
Right, the mysteries weren't exactly public knowledge.
Exactly. So he couldn't just lay it all out plainly for everyone to read.
So how did he get around that, according to her?
Consequently, she explained, he used allegory, symbolism. He deliberately veiled the profounder meanings.
So we should be looking for, like, a hidden code, not just straightforward arguments.
Word of, yes. Think of it as layers of meaning, an outer layer for the public and inner layers for those who had the key other initiates.
Like the Timaeus dialogue. The source material mentions that one specifically.
Exactly. The Timaeus, with its complex cosmology, was presented by Blavatsky as being so dense, so packed with hidden meaning, that only another initiate could truly grasp its full import.
Wow. So this idea of deliberate concealment, it's not just a minor point, it's central to her whole way of reading Plato.
Absolutely central. You have to accept that premise to follow her interpretations.
Okay, so with that foundation, Plato the initiate, deliberately veiling truths, let's dive into how Blavatsky saw his actual concepts aligning with theosophical ideas. First up, the divine principle, the logos, and his famous theory of forms.
Right. Blavatsky found Plato's highest principles, his metaphysics, to be remarkably in accord with theosophical metaphysics.
How so? Like his idea of the good.
Exactly. She equated Plato's the good, or his first cause, with the fundamental theosophical concept that omnipresent, eternal, boundless, and immutable principle.
The ultimate reality beyond description.
Precisely. That ultimate reality beyond all human comprehension. And this wasn't just a casual similarity for her.
She saw it as the same core idea.
That's the argument. By linking Plato's highest principle to this core theosophical concept, she was basically saying, look, even at the peak of Western philosophy, you find echoes of this universal, ineffable reality, which is, of course, a fundamental theosophical belief.
Okay. And what about the logos? That term gets used in different ways.
Good point. Blavatsky interpreted Plato's logos not just as, say, human reason or logic, but as a divine emanation, a primary manifestation coming forth from that absolute principle.
And she connected this idea to other traditions too, didn't she?
Yes, the sources show she drew parallels all over the place to the Kabbalistic concept of Rasit, fellow Judais's logos, the Christian idea of Christ.
And Eastern ideas as well.
Things like the Buddhist Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, and even the Vedantic concept of Atman, the true self. She saw it as a universal concept expressed through different cultural lenses.
Painting a picture of one truth with many faces.
Exactly. And then when we get to Plato's theory of ideas or forms.
The world of perfect blueprints, right? The ideal chair, the ideal beauty.
Right. Blavatsky took this theory and interpreted it as the pre-existing ideal world, a realm of eternal archetypal patterns. She called them the highest and invisible originals that emanate from the divine thought.
Okay.
And this, she argued, finds a direct parallel in the theosophical understanding of how the cosmos manifests. The idea that our physical world is just a reflection, a shadow almost, of these higher, more real archetypal planes.
So by drawing this parallel, she's essentially trying to show a deep structural similarity between Platonic metaphysics and theosophical cosmogony.
Precisely. She's arguing they describe the same fundamental structure of reality, just perhaps using slightly different language or levels of detail.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about the soul? Its nature, its journey, that's huge in Plato. How did Blavatsky connect with that?
She really emphasized Plato's teaching on the soul's inherent divinity. She highlighted his view that the human soul achieves greatness, achieves its potential, through alliance with nous.
Nous, that's the higher mind, the spiritual intellect.
Yes, exactly. That higher spiritual mind, the part of us capable of connecting with divine understanding. Blavatsky saw this as directly corresponding to key aspects of the theosophical view of our higher nature. Specifically, the idea of the fundamental identity of all souls with the universal oversoul.
So the individual soul isn't fundamentally separate, it's part of a greater whole.
That's the core theosophical idea she saw reflected in Plato. And Plato's arguments for the soul's immortality were crucial for her, too.
How so?
For Blavatsky, these arguments directly supported Theosophy's belief in the enduring nature of our true immortal self, the omnipotence of man's own immortal self, as she put it, and its ultimate connection back to that universal soul.
And she also credited Plato with teaching the anima mundi concept, the world soul.
Yes, she saw him as a key proponent of that idea, too, the idea that the entire cosmos is ensouled.
Okay, moving on to reincarnation and karma. These are often seen as more, well, Eastern concepts. How did Blavatsky bring Plato into that discussion?
Well, she presented the doctrine of reincarnation metempsychosis. is the Greek term Plato sometimes uses as a absolutely core tenet of Theosophy, and she explicitly aligned it with Plato's teachings.
So she saw direct parallels.
Yes. She viewed Theosophy's concept of an obligatory pilgrimage for every soul through the cycle of incarnation, basically. The soul having to go through many lives as being clearly mirrored in Plato's descriptions. His myths about the soul's journey after death, the choices it makes, and its return to earthly life.
And the driving force behind this cycle, this pilgrimage, what makes it necessary?
Ah, that's where karma comes in, according to Blavatsky. She connected Plato's ideas about judgment after death, the consequences of one's actions in life determining the next incarnation.
She linked that directly to the Theosophical law of karma.
Exactly. The law of cause and effect that governs our experiences not just within one life, but across multiple lifetimes. She saw Plato describing the mechanism of karma, even if he didn't use that specific Sanskrit term.
Interesting. Now, Plato's Demiurge, that figure in the Timaeus who crafts the cosmos,
Yeah.
that's been interpreted in so many ways. What was Blavatsky's specific take?
Right, the Demiurge can be confusing. Blavatsky was quite clear. She did not see Plato's Demiurge as the ultimate, absolute God or principle.
Not the first cause we talked about earlier.
No. For her, the Demiurge represented a lower order of creative intelligence. She referred to it as the collective host, Demiurge, seeing it as the aggregate of various divine or semi-divine beings or forces that actually shape the manifested universe, following the blueprint from the divine mind.
So more like architects or builders working from the ultimate plan.
Precisely. This fits neatly within Theosophy's quite complex hierarchical cosmogony, the idea of different planes of reality and different orders of beings involved in creation.
And she saw connections to Gnostic ideas here, too.
Yes. She noted the alignment with some Gnostic views of a lesser creator figure, distinct from the ultimate unknowable Godhead. But she stressed that this demiurgic level, while important for manifestation, is not the ultimate source or the ultimate object of worship in her system.
Got it. And finally, in this section on concepts, Atlantis,
Good.
Plato's famous story. How did Blavatsky treat that? Just an allegory?
Oh, no, not at all. Blavatsky took Plato's account of Atlantis completely seriously, as historical fact.
Really? As actual history?
Yes. She fully incorporated it into Theosophy's grand narrative of planetary evolution and the succession of what she called root races. Atlantis, for her, was the home of the fourth root race.
And its destruction.
Its destruction served as a key example of cosmic law, specifically karma, operating on a massive scale. It was a moral lesson about the downfall of a civilization that misused its knowledge and power, and also an illustration of the cyclical nature of history and cosmic evolution within the Theosophical scheme.
Wow. Okay, so she wove it right into the fabric of her own cosmology.
Absolutely. It wasn't just a side story, it was integral.
Now, this next point about the human constitution, this is something I find really interesting. In her earlier big book, Isis Unveiled, Blavatsky uses a simpler threefold model of the human being, body, soul, spirit, which sounds quite Platonic, actually.
It does, yes.
But then later in The Secret Doctrine, she lays out a much more complex sevenfold model. How does she reconcile this apparent difference, especially when talking about Plato? Did she say her earlier work was wrong?
She addresses directly. She didn't say the earlier model was wrong exactly. She explained that the sevenfold constitution wasn't a contradiction of the threefold one, but rather a more detailed elaboration of it.
Like zooming in.
Exactly like zooming in, providing a more granular view. She argued the sevenfold model was derived more explicitly from Eastern esoteric systems, which she felt contained the fuller teaching.
Okay, but how did Plato fit into that explanation? If he used a threefold model, was he just limited in his understanding according to her?
Not exactly limited, but bound by secrecy. In the Key to Theosophy, she stated that Plato, because he was an initiate under oath, could only hint at the full septenary structure.
Ah, the secrecy obligation again.
Right. He hinted at it, she said, within his various combinations of soul and spirit, but for public or exoteric teaching, he presented the simpler threefold division. It was suitable for those not initiated into the deeper mysteries.
So Plato wasn't wrong. In her view, he was just presenting an accessible, simplified version of a more complex, esoteric truth.
That's precisely her argument. The sevenfold model was the fuller revelation, part of the deeper wisdom religion. But the threefold model used by Plato, and in her own earlier work, was a valid, albeit less detailed way of looking at it, consistent with the veiled nature of his initiate teachings.
Okay, that clarifies how she handled that potential inconsistency. Now, Blavatsky wasn't shy about critiquing other people's interpretations of Plato, was she?
Oh, absolutely not. She actively criticized interpretations that she felt completely missed the boat.
What were her main targets? What kind of interpretations did she reject?
Her primary critique was aimed at interpretations confined only to the literal or exoteric meaning of Plato's texts.
Because she believed the real meaning was hidden.
Exactly. Since she held that Plato's deepest teachings were veiled in allegory and symbol, anyone just taking his words at face value, doing a purely literal reading, was bound to miss the essential esoteric message. They were only getting the surface layer.
That follows logically from her view of Plato as an initiate. What else did she object to?
She strongly opposed the materialistic philosophies that were gaining ground in the 19th century. She argued they were fundamentally incapable of grasping Plato's spiritual metaphysics.
Because they denied the reality of spirit, the soul.
Precisely. How could a materialistic viewpoint understand Plato's focus on the divine mind, the immortal soul, the pre-existence of the soul, the reality of the eternal forms? It was just incompatible with his whole worldview, as she saw it.
And what about religious interpretations? Did she have issues there too?
Yes, she was critical of attempts to impose later dogmas, particularly Christian theological frameworks, onto Plato's philosophy.
Why?
She felt this obscured his original roots. It hid his connections to the pre-Christian mysteries and, crucially for her, his links to Eastern thought. Reading Plato through a later Christian lens distorted his actual place in the history of the wisdom religion.
So it sounds like she was really trying to peel back layers of later interpretation, whether materialistic or dogmatically religious, to get back to what she believed was the original esoteric Plato.
That's a good way to put it. She wanted to restore him to his context within this ancient universal tradition.
And it's interesting, the source notes, she also explained apparent inconsistencies or developments in her own teachings in a similar way.
Yes, as progressive revelations, or sometimes as necessary simplifications in earlier accounts that were expanded upon later. This idea of progressive revelation seems pretty key to her whole approach.
It does. Okay, so she criticized some interpretations, but the source also mentions some interpreters that Blavatsky actually held in very high regard. Who were they, and why did she value their work?
Right, she wasn't just critical. She expressed high regard for specific interpreters whose approaches really resonated with her own esoteric understanding of Plato. The two main ones mentioned are Thomas Taylor and Alexander Wilder.
Thomas Taylor. Let's start with him. Who was he? Why did Blavatsky like his work?
Thomas Taylor, sometimes called the English Platonist, was active in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. He's famous for producing the first complete English translations of both Plato and Aristotle, a massive undertaking.
Wow. And why did Blavatsky single him out? What was special about his interpretations?
She praised his intuitive perception. She saw him as someone who really got the deeper meaning. She explicitly viewed his work as superior to, say, the translations by Benjamin Jowett, who was a major figure in Platonic studies in her own time, but offered a more, perhaps, academic or exoteric reading.
And what aspects of Taylor's approach resonated with her?
Well, Taylor himself was deeply influenced by Neoplatonism. So naturally, he emphasized Plato's use of allegory and symbolism, the journey of the soul, the existence of divine hierarchies, and Plato's strong connection to the ancient mysteries.
All the things Blavatsky focused on.
Exactly. Taylor's Neoplatonic lens highlighted precisely the elements that Blavatsky saw as crucial for an esoteric understanding of Plato. His work confirmed her view.
Okay, and the other name was Alexander Wilder.
Yes, Alexander Wilder.
Oh.
He was actually an American scholar, and interestingly, he served as an editor for Blavatsky's own Isis Unveiled.
Ah, so a direct connection there.
A very direct connection. She respected him immensely, crediting him, alongside Taylor, with having a deep intuition on Platonic subjects. Wilder was a scholar of Platonism, Neoplatonism, and related esoteric traditions.
And what specifically did she appreciate about his understanding?
She noted his grasp of what he termed magic, which in this context doesn't mean stage tricks, but aligns more with the theosophical understanding of theurgy divine work, communion with higher realities, and the potential for developing latent human spiritual powers. Wilder understood that dimension in Platonism.
So for Blavatsky, finding scholars like Taylor and Wilder wasn't just about finding people who agreed with her.
No, it was more than that. She saw their work as providing crucial historical evidence. It showed that there was a legitimate, existing esoteric tradition of interpreting Plato, one that stretched back long before her time.
It validated her approach, showing it wasn't just her own invention.
Precisely. Their interpretation served as historical precedent and support for the kind of deeper, esoteric reading she was advocating through Theosophy.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, finally, let's talk about Neoplatonism itself. The source material really emphasizes its crucial role in Blavatsky's view of things. Why was Neoplatonism so incredibly important to her?
Neoplatonism, that philosophical school that really flourished in Alexandria from the 3rd century CE onwards, well, it held absolutely exceptional importance in Blavatsky's view of philosophical history. She didn't just see it as a link. She identified the Neoplatonists as the direct precursors and, in a sense, the originators of the Theosophical current in the West.
The direct precursors. Wow, she even connected the actual name Theosophy to them, didn't she?
Yes, absolutely. She stated quite clearly that the name Theosophy, meaning Theosophia, divine wisdom, actually dates from that era. She attributed its origin to the school's founder, Ammoniusakis, and his disciples, who she said established the eclectic Theosophical system.
Eclectic meaning drawing from various sources.
Exactly. And she made the connection explicit, affirming that the Neoplatonists, they were the Theosophists of early centuries. For her, it wasn't just similar, it was Theosophy in an earlier form.
And Ammoniusakis, the founder.
Well,
What was his big project, according to Blavatsky?
Ammoniusakis was presented by Blavatsky as this pivotal figure. His great aim, she said, was to reconcile all the existing philosophical systems, all the religions, under one single universal truth, the original wisdom religion.
Trying to find the common ground.
Yes, and more than that. He sought to reveal their common origin and their essential harmony by stripping away the later distortions, the misunderstandings, the dogmas, to get back to the pure ancient wisdom underneath.
That sounds remarkably similar to Blavatsky's own project centuries later.
It really does. She clearly saw him as a kindred spirit, attempting the same grand synthesis. She even pointed out how his teaching of 3 grades or levels of knowledge mirrored Plato's ideas in the Republic, and how his emphasis on contemplation as the path to truth echoed Plato's path to realizing the good.
It's fascinating to think someone was trying to do that unification way back in the 3rd century CE, connecting Greek philosophy, Egyptian wisdom, maybe even Eastern ideas.
It really makes you think about the persistence of these synthesizing impulses throughout history.
Definitely. And the core beliefs of Neoplatonism itself, did Blavatsky see those as aligning closely with 19th century Theosophy?
Absolutely. She highlighted numerous shared core tenets, things like belief in a supreme, unknowable first principle, totally transcendent,
To one.
right? The one. An emanationist cosmology where reality unfolds in layers from that source. The soul's divine origin, its immortality, its journey through reincarnation.
That psychosis again.
Also, the idea that matter is derivative, not the ultimate reality, and crucially, the emphasis on achieving direct spiritual knowledge or gnosis and the practice of the theurgy to connect with the divine. All these were key Neoplatonic ideas she saw mirrored in Theosophy.
And she named specific Neoplatonic figures as exponents of this early Theosophy.
Yes, the big names. Plotinus, his student Porphyry, later figures like Iamblichus, Proclus. She considered all of them important exponents of this ancient Theosophy, preserving and transmitting aspects of the wisdom religion.
So wrapping up this point, for Blavatsky, Neoplatonism wasn't just some interesting historical school of thought. It was the vital historical bridge.
Exactly. It was the crucial link connecting the esoteric wisdom she saw veiled in Plato back to the ancient mysteries and forward, providing the immediate historical foundation and even the name for her own theosophical movement in the 19th century. It proved, in her eyes, the historical reality of an esoteric synthesizing tradition in the West.
Okay. That really clarifies its importance in her framework. So let's try to sum up our deep dive here. What's the main takeaway from Blavatsky's perspective on Plato, based on these sources?
I think the key takeaway is that Blavatsky fundamentally repositioned Plato. She didn't see him primarily as the father of Western rationalism, but as a significant initiate, a vital link, and the key Western link to this ancient universal wisdom religion she believed underpinned all true spirituality and philosophy.
And his deepest teachings, therefore, weren't just philosophical arguments to be debated.
No, they were esoteric truths, veiled in allegory, that required the specific key, the esoteric understanding provided by Theosophy, or its precursor Neoplatonism, to be truly unlocked and appreciated.
It's a radically different way of looking at Plato than most people encounter, and this interpretation, it really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does.
What does this perspective mean for how we understand the history of philosophy itself and this idea of potential hidden meanings lurking within ancient texts?
And that raises a question for you listening. Does hearing about Blavatsky's interpretation challenge your own previous understanding of Plato? Does it maybe open up some new avenues for thinking about ancient wisdom, even if you don't accept her whole framework?
It definitely prompts questions. And
Hmm.
on that note, here's maybe a final thought to ponder. If Plato's wisdom, as Blavatsky claimed, truly does have roots in an anciently universal wisdom religion that also flowed into other traditions across the globe, what other surprising connections, what other hidden dialogues between cultures and philosophies might still be out there waiting to be discovered just beneath the surface of our accepted knowledge?